Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Carolyn. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. If you like the video, definitely give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to subscribe to see more from me, I highly recommend it because this channel is definitely a vibe. The story starts on July 26th, 1988. At 5 p.m., Tate and his friend Chad are seen in a grocery store parking lot, kind of just walking around, goofing around, just being teens, not doing much, just kind of hanging around. Cut to 6 p.m., 1 hour later, Chad shows up at Tate's house to tell Tate's parents that Tate has unalived himself by hanging. Tate's mom describes Chad's demeanor as very calm, and she found it a little bit strange of how calm he was considering the gravity of the situation. So Chad leads the parents to Tate's body, and he is still hanging from a tree, and his father cuts him down. So the police are called, and immediately they ask Chad what happened. And Chad said that him and Tate were there. They had gotten some beer. They were just going to listen to music and kind of hang out in the woods. Chad then decided to head back to the car to get more beer. And when he came back, he found Tate in the state that he was in. The problem with this story is that Tate had 2 marks around his neck. And normally when someone unalives themselves by hanging, the rope will hit them right here. So they'll have 1 mark here, but Tate's body had a mark here, but then had a mark much lower down here, which to the police indicated that he had been strangled and then hung from the tree. So they confront Chad with this information, and the police say to him, your story does not match the injuries on Tate. Like, your story's not matching. It doesn't make sense. So then Chad's story changes. And he says that Tate attempted to unalive himself and the rope broke. They then went and got another rope, and then Tate was successful in what he was trying to do. And Chad said the reason that he lied was because he was afraid he would get in trouble for not trying to stop Tate from doing what he was doing. Which, I mean, that's not suspicious. Your story is that your friend attempted to unalive himself. The rope broke, it didn't work. So you went with him to get another rope so he could finish what he was trying to do? The entire thing was extremely suspicious from the beginning. But this is how it starts. Chad claiming he tried to do it, the rope broke, and he went and got another one, and I just kind of hung out and let him. I'm confused already. If you're confused, trust me, I'm confused already. It doesn't make sense from the very beginning. But it gets even crazier, much, much crazier. So then they have Tate's funeral, and Tate's funeral is where everything just intensifies and sends this story in an absolutely insane direction. So before his funeral, there started to be rumors in town that somehow his death was related to a satanic cult. Nobody had any evidence. There wasn't any, nobody went to the police and offered this information. It was just this town. It was a very small town in Texas. There was only about 5,000 people that lived there. Everybody knew everybody else. So there were just all these rumors that it had something to do with a satanic cult. Now, this was in 1988, and in the 1980s and early 1990s, Satanic Panic was out of control. It was Every single murder that happened, people were claiming that there were these satanic cults going around, and all of, like, it was just a whole lot of absolute insanity. It didn't make any sense. And years later, it was proven that none of this was true. I mean, obviously there ended up being murders that had to do with satanic rituals, which I've done a story on one of them. But in this case, this satanic panic takes over and causes all of this confusion and all of this misinformation to go on. But the satanic panic didn't just come from nowhere. Tate's funeral is when a lot of people started believing that this had something to do with a satanic cult. So on the day of Tate's funeral, his family was all, everyone's sitting at the church waiting for the funeral to begin. And right before the funeral begins, a woman comes in and she's dressed in all black, which, I mean, most people that go to funerals are dressed in all black, but she had this like veil that was black covering her face. And it just sounded like she was really dramatically dressed for this funeral. So everyone notices her come in just because she's dressed so bizarrely. And Tate's family start asking each other, do you know who that woman is? And no one in the family, they're all kind of whispering to each other at the front of the church, and nobody knows who this woman is. So Tate's aunt decides, when the funeral's over, I'm going to go back and ask who she is. And they kind of just proceed with the funeral. Then the funeral is just going on. There's a young boy sitting in the front row, and he starts chanting very quietly, and he just keeps repeating the word So I can't say the word on YouTube, but unalive himself. This S-U, the word I'm saying, meaning. He starts repeating that over and over and over, and he's gradually getting louder and louder and louder and louder until the funeral ends up ending. The funeral is just about to end, so the aunt looks to the back of the church because she wants to find out who this woman is, because it was just the whole situation she found very bizarre. And she turns around to look, and the woman's gone. And after the funeral, people were asking different, family members were asking friends. They were asking a lot of different people that had been at the funeral, does anyone know who this woman was? And no one knew who she was. And everyone had noticed her because she was dressed so bizarrely. The family at this point does not believe he unalived himself, but that is what the police are saying was the cause of death. Then the police get a tip that they should go to the woods near where the incident happened, and they would see evidence that what happened to Tate was related to a satanic cult. So the police go where where this anonymous tip tells them to go. And they get there, and there's like a cow's head stuck in a tree. And then there's logs and stones kind of making this circle. So it looks kind of like an altar that you would imagine a satanic ritual. It kind of matched with what you would expect if there was a satanic ritual had happened. This might be how they set it up. So the police go and check that out, but there's no evidence there. Like they just see this weird situation with the cow head and the logs and the stones and stuff, but there's not much they can do. There's no one there. There's no, they look around. There's no evidence of anything other than this weird cow head and these logs and stones. So they make note of it and they leave. So the police were patrolling Tate's grave, and they would drive, they would do their normal patrols where they would drive around the town, but there wasn't much going on. It was a really small town. So they would go and check out his grave, because still at this time, the police are thinking something satanic's going on, so we got to keep an eye on his grave. And they go to his grave one night and they see a man standing over his gravestone, and he's there for quite a while. And the police officer doesn't approach him. The police officer just turns off his lights, sits in his car, and watches this man. So when the man walks away, the police officer goes over to Tate's grave, and he can see that there was like spit from chewing tobacco, and it was spit all over his gravestone. Plus, there was an upside down cross, not a big cross, like it was a small cross. It wasn't a big cross or anything, but it was upside down leaning against his gravestone, and it had been burned. So now the police are just convinced this has something to do with something satanic. That's the only thing they're thinking at this point. So Tate had died at the end of July in 1988. So the kids were on summer break. So once the kids go back to school, to the high school, the rumor mill is running on high speed. The kids are just coming up with the craziest, wildest stories. And it's just getting worse and worse. Like the stories are just getting more and more unbelievable. So all of the kids kind of agree on this one story, that Tate was killed because a satanic cult told him to bring them a blonde hair, blue-eyed child to sacrifice, and he wouldn't do it. Now, just to let you know, there's absolutely zero evidence that any of this is true. This is all just the kids coming up with these wild stories. There's no proof of any of it. But there is proof of something else very, very strange. So the staff starts noticing people sitting in their cars outside the school, like adults, not kids. And at first, they kind of assumed that it was parents waiting to pick up their kids. But then they started noticing like they were there all day long, and they knew everyone in town. So when they would look in the cars, they didn't recognize any of the people in these cars. And these cars would wait there all day, but they never picked up any kids at the end of the day. They would just sit outside the school all day, and then when school was over, they would leave. And eventually the school calls the police, and they go and question a man who is sitting outside the school. When the police talk to him, he does say that I don't have a child that goes to this school. I'm not here to pick up a kid. He gives no explanation, and the police just let him go because I don't know that he's really he's not really breaking the law. I mean, he's creepy AF, but he's not breaking the law. The police tell him to stay away from the school, but that's kind of the end of that. Then a young girl goes to the police and says she had a vision. Please note the dramatic eye roll, because whenever there's anything satanic going on, there's always a vision. So this girl tells the police that she had a vision. So the girl tells the police, I had a dream and I had this vision. And the vision was there was some satanic cult that was at this abandoned farmhouse that had like a red porch light on. And there was all this satanic stuff going on there. This is a vision. This girl has not actually seen anything. This is all something she's made up in her mind. But the police want to look into it. So from the house that she described, the police figure out what house she's talking about. So they drive out to this house, and it had just recently been burned down. But there's no evidence there that any satanic shit's going on. Like, they're not believing this girl's vision. Da, 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 da. So yeah, there was that. But then something with a little bit more credibility comes up. So now Ray comes into the story, and Ray is a 15-year-old kid who one night is driving drunk and crashes his car into a utility pole, and the police, show up to the accident. And Ray says that he was on his way to a satanic ritual when he crashed his car. He also claimed that he witnessed Tate's murder. Now, the next day, when they interview Ray and he's sobered up, he tells them everything he said was not true. And they speak with Ray's father, who says it's impossible that he was there the night that Tate died, because he got in trouble a lot with the police, and he had been in a youth detention center that night. So it was impossible that Ray was there when Tate died. But we're not done with Ray and his family yet. So Ray's family is very, very well known to the police. His brother and his father have a lot of felonies. And Ray has, well, obviously, I've just told you of him driving drunk, crashing. He's been in a detention center. So Ray had been getting in trouble for kind of more minor things. But his brother and his dad had committed serious felonies. So the police were very familiar with the entire family. And someone calls in a tip saying that Ray and his family are in a satanic cult and they do all this satanic shit and blah, blah, blah. So the police are like, okay, let's drive by the house and see if there's anything weird going on. So the police get there, and the only thing kind of strange to them was they could tell that there had been graffiti on the back of the house that had been covered up, but it wasn't covered up that well, but they couldn't read what it said exactly. So they asked the neighbors. So the neighbors start saying, some people say that the graffiti had said Devil House. Some people said that the graffiti had said, I love the devil. But when they ask Ray and his family what it had said, Ray admits that he was the one who had done the graffiti, and he had written, I love L. So just I love and the letter L. And the police can't prove anything, and it's graffiti. So like, what are you gonna do with graffiti? Like, it's graffiti on their own house. Like, it's like, what are you gonna do with that information? One rumor that was kind of giving a bit of an explanation for why Tate would have taken his own life was he had not long before that broken up with his girlfriend, Karen. And then police get a tip saying Karen is satanic and in a cult. So the reason the tip says that Karen's in a satanic cult is that she owns a Ouija board and she has a couple books on witchcraft. And that's not that weird, in my opinion. The police at this point are operating in the belief that Tate had done this to himself. So they're following up on all these rumors and, I guess, tips, but they're not really believing any of it. They're just kind of following up to see, okay, is there something more or is there not? Then, to make things even crazier, 3 years later, on May 30th, 1991, Terri, who is Tate's sister, dies in Ray's home. So the home that had the graffiti on the outside, Tate's sister dies in that home. And Terri had been going through a really hard time. She had left her husband, she'd left her 4 kids. She was going, she was partying a lot. She was doing a lot of drugs, and she was going through a really hard time. So the reason that she was at Ray's house was Ray had an older brother, as I had mentioned, who had a lot of felonies, and Terri was dating his friend. So as the story goes from the people who were at the house where Terri died, was that they were all just partying, and they found her laying on the ground cold, and they called the police. So the police show up, and Terri is laying on the ground in the home face down. So they take her body and they do an autopsy. And obviously they test for alcohol in her system, and she had double the legal limit. So they decided that she must have died of choking on her own vomit. Now, the thing that makes this a little bit suspicious is she was face down. So normally when a person is that intoxicated that they end up, throwing up and choking on their own vomit, it does happen. But they're laying on their back because they start to throw up and it goes back down their throat because they're laying on their back, but she's face down. So it's very unlikely that that would be true, but that's what the autopsy determined at this time. There's going to be a whole bunch more autopsies that come back. At this point, that's what the autopsy determines. Now, nobody in the town believes that Terri died accidentally. One of the big things is that Terri never believed that Tate took his own life. Terri very, very much believed there was a satanic cult that killed her brother, and she would talk about it constantly to everyone. So for 3 years, she would talk about the satanic cult that killed her brother, and she would go on and on. So people start these rumors that maybe Terri was killed to shut her up. So at this point, Tate and Terri's parents, they want the sheriff to look into their deaths. They've determined these to be one an unaliving and then one an accidental. But the evidence doesn't support either of those. But the sheriff refuses to look any further into any of it, until the sheriff gets charged with selling drugs and is removed from the police force. So then a new sheriff comes to town, and he is very interested in reopening these cases and looking into it, because he looks at it and goes, yeah, this doesn't make any sense at all. And one thing that the sheriff finds out is that Ray's brother had attempted to unalive himself by taking about 30 pills of a drug called Elevell. And this drug will come up again. And it's not a party drug. It's not a drug someone takes for fun or to get high from. It's an antidepressant. So it's not a drug that people take recreationally. And when he had tried to unalive himself, he left a note that said, "I know who killed Terri, and I can't live with it anymore." But then once he recovers from the overdose, he says, "I didn't write that letter, and I have no idea who killed Terri." So then the sheriff decides, okay, we need to take another look at Tate's body. He wants to start with Tate because the evidence does not in any way support the story that his friend Chad had told. It doesn't make any sense. So they exhume his body and they do testing on him, and they find Elevell, the same drug that Ray's brother had overdosed on, in Tate's system. This is not a drug that had been prescribed to him. There's no reason he would have been taking it. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's not something people take recreational. Like, it's not a prescription drug that people buy on the street to take as like a party drug. Like, it's an antidepressant, so it's not a drug that people would take for fun. With Tate, the medical examiner, he can't really say 100% that he believes one or the other manner of death. He basically leaves it as undetermined, and he says that he believes it's a 70% chance that it was a homicide, but he doesn't have enough that he can commit to saying the manner of death was homicide, so he has to leave it as undetermined. So then the sheriff, they want to look at Terri's body again. So the medical examiner takes a look at Terri's body, and the medical examiner very quickly says she did not choke on her vomit. No, that is definitely not how she died. The medical examiner believes that it was asphyxiation during an assault. He believes that she was smothered during some type of an assault. And I'll give you one guess as to what drug they find in Terri's system. Elavil, same drug that Ray's brother overdosed on, same drug that was in Tate, same drug that was in Terri. So all three of these people have this in their system, and they can confirm that none of them have been prescribed this drug. Like, it's not, no doctor prescribed this drug to any of these people. And at this point, the police, they just don't know what to do. The sheriff has reopened both cases, trying to figure out what happened. He was able to determine, yes, the initial findings were wrong, but still doesn't have any real concrete answers. So the police are just, they don't know what to think at this point. And the rumors are still going wild. And then some strange things start happening. And it's a trigger warning. Animal stuff. Maybe fast forward 10 seconds. They start finding small animals with their hearts removed in the middle of the road all over town. So then they get a tip to go to this middle-aged couple's home, and they go there and they find art that is pornographic and some consider satanic. And one of the pictures is of a person with a goat head, but it's art. So it's not evidence of anything. Like, there's nothing in this case that people can say, okay, they can look at things and say, yeah, that's a bit weird, but there's nothing that's saying what happened, and there's no evidence of anything that they could use to charge anyone. And the police don't even know who they would charge anyways. The police literally have no idea what happened or what's going on. And still to this day, both Terri and Tate's murders are considered unsolved. And even Tate's death, it's not determined as a homicide. His cause of death is undetermined. Terri's cause of death is listed as homicide, but no one was ever caught. They never figured out what happened. And this was part of what the problem with Satanic Panic was because people would get crazy. It's this propaganda started to be spread all over that there were like satanic cults committing all of these crazy murders. And people were really believing it. Like, now we kind of look back at it and we're like, why would you believe such nonsense in some of these cases? But it really was something that really gripped people, and people really believed that this was happening. And there were a lot of police that really believed this was happening. But the result of it was, yes, obviously there are satanic killings. I've done a video on one, but at this time, people were so hysterical about Satanic Panic that it overshadowed all of these investigations. and people would start rumors, or they would try to, as I had mentioned about the animals, that I'm not going to mention what I said earlier. It was almost like people were trying to create evidence to prove that it was a satanic cult, when in reality, there's nothing in this case that suggests for any reason that this was anything to do with anything satanic. And at this point, it's unsolved. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. And if you'd like to see more from me, definitely subscribe, because we are a serious vibe. And I will see you in the next one.